Hi, this is Frank Burke with Dynasoar Rocketry, and this is a quick tutorial on how to set up elevator trim on the flap switch or using flight modes with Spectrum DX transmitters. This would apply to the DX6e and the DX-8 Gen 2 that I have. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go into a new model. So I'm going to click the scroll bar over here, and I'm going to scroll down to all the way to the bottom into System Setup. I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to go down to model name, or model select, sorry. And I'm going to do add new model. So this would be if you're going to add a new model. And I'll do create. Okay, so I've created a new model. Now I'm going to go down. You can go into the model name and change the name if you want. And I'm going to go into aircraft type. So you're going to go into aircraft type and it'll show you the wing. So I'm going to go down to wing where it's highlighted in normal. And I'm going to scroll to the right until it says Elevon. And then I'm going to do the back button. And that's all you need to do for the normal settings. So I'm going to hit back again. Okay, now I'm going to hit the scroll bar one more time after I was back into the model, and I'm going to go down here and you should see flap system. So if you go into flap system and select that, you can go over here to inhibit and highlight and click on that and then scroll through. Now I like to use switch D, so I'm going to select that. And you can see here, position 1, 2, and 3, that's the position of the switch. So you can see when I move the button down to the middle, position 1, the bottom is position 2. So all the way up on the D switch, you can go over here. Now I'm not actually using flaps, I'm just using the elevator function. So I'm going to select this, and let's say my model needs a little bit of down trim for boost. And then I'll go into the elevator column for position 2, which is landing, and it'll typically need anywhere from 25 to 40% setting for landing, depending on your model. And then I'm going to click the back button. Okay, so that's all I needed to do to set that up. So if I use the scroll bar and go over. Okay, now I've gone back to the main menu, and I'm going to scroll to the right with that scroll button, and this shows me the monitor. Now we're looking at column 2 and 3, which correspond to the channel 2 and 3 inputs in the AR410 receiver. So when I move the stick up and down, it shows the two servos will be moving. Now it shows them opposite, but in reality when you've actually flipped them and mounted them on the model, the elevator will move together. And when you move aileron, it shows them in the monitor here moving together, but again in the model they'll actually move the controls opposite. So now I'm going to flip my flap switch up, which is the takeoff position, and you can see that both channels have moved a little bit. That's the takeoff mode. And in the middle there's no elevator trim, and down you can see that's the glide position. So the glide position is opposite from the boost position. And that's all you need to do if you're using the flap button or switch. Okay, now this is going to show you how to use the flight modes to do the same function as a flap switch. The flight mode can also be assigned to a switch, so you can have a launch mode and a landing mode. The advantage in this is that you get an audible command that tells you what mode it's in, and it allows you to set the trims using the trim levers on the front of the radio instead of going into the flap menu and setting those separately. So if you're doing a flight on a windier day and you maybe need a little more down or up trim, you can just put that in using the trim switch on your transmitter on the front, and that will only affect the launch mode. And separately, if you go into the landing mode on the other switch position, then you can set those positions using the trim switch on the trim lever on the front of the transmitter as well. So you can kind of adjust those on the fly without having to go into the flap mode, but it's a little more work to set that up. Or if for some reason your radio isn't showing you the flap menu, on some radios they may have disabled the flap function in Elevon mode. This will show you how to do it. So I'm going to go into the function list by clicking on the scroll bar, and I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom into System Setup, and I'm going to scroll down to F mode setup. So F mode setup, I'm going to then, this is flight mode, so I'm going to say switch 1, and I can select what I want it to be. Now I'm going to select D because I like that switch. It's the tallest switch, and it's on the left side where you're not really doing anything. So I select switch D. Now I'm going to scroll down into next here, and see it says flight mode. So you've got 3 different flight modes on the left here. So the switch is up right now, and so the top flight mode has got a square, middle, bottom. So this just shows you the positions. You'll have 3 flight modes. So I'm going to go back to previous and then hit the back button again. Okay. And then I'm going to go into spoken flight mode. So what this is going to do, this is going to give you the audible commands. So flight mode 1, oh sorry, I have to figure this out. So speak mode 1. So if you go down flight mode 1 and you go down to this thing that says mode 1, select that. You've got a bunch of options that you can scroll through. So my switch is up, that's flight mode 1, and I'm going to select launch. Now if you go down here to test, click on the test when it's highlighted.
Launch mode.
See, it says launch mode.
Launch mode.
Okay. Now if I move my switch down to the middle position, it says mode 2, and I can have it say anything different in my options. But mode 2 I don't use. I use up for boost and all the way down for glide, and the middle one's kind of neutral. So if we wanted, I could select this one and say, let's say something that's going to not be launch or land. Let's call it normal mode. And then I'll go down to test. Normal mode.
Normal mode.
Okay. Now I'm going to put my switch down all the way. That's this switch here. So I move that down all the way. And I'm going to back and highlight mode 3. And I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to say, I want it to say landing.
Landing mode.
Okay. So now it says landing mode. So I'm going to hit the back button. And the last thing you're going to have to do, which is important, is go into trim setup. So I'm going to select trim setup, and I'm going to select elevator. Now see, this says common. What that means is in flight modes, the trim setting that you have on the transmitter on the faceplate on the very front is going to apply to any flight mode. It's going to be the same trim setting. So I want to change that because that's the whole point of this. You want a different trim setting for the different flight modes. So I'm going to select that one next to elevator, click on it, and it'll say F mode. Okay, So what that means is in each different flight mode, you can use the elevator trim here on the faceplate, and it'll apply differently depending on which flight mode you're in. So I'm going to hit back now.
Landing mode.
Okay.
Launch mode.
So I'm in launch mode. So now what I'm going to do to show you that this is working is I'm going to give, let's give some down trim. Okay, so I just used the thumb button here to give myself some down trim.
Normal mode.
See, now look at the trim position.
Launch mode.
When I'm in normal mode, see it goes to neutral because I haven't given any trim for that one.
Landing mode.
And then landing mode, oops, see, I'm going to give up trim because you normally need up trim for glide. So see this? I'm in launch mode, I have down elevator.
Normal mode.
No trim for normal mode.
Landing mode.
Landing mode, I have up trim.
Normal mode. Launch
Okay,
mode.
now I'll go into the monitor here. Okay, so just like we saw before, elevator up and down will give opposite in the monitor, but together in reality. Aileron will give show together here in the monitor, but be opposite on the model. And then we'll zoom in, we'll see the trim. So if I'm in normal mode, the trims are the same. Now the little numbers above say 0 and -2. It's just because the actual trim on this isn't perfect. It still senses some trim on the right channel. So when I go into launch mode, you can see that -2 went to +7 and the 0 went to -9, which means they're moving the same amount. One's going one direction, one's going the other. But again, because they're switched on the model, they're going to move the same amount. And then when I go into landing mode, oops, sorry, the screen keeps.
Normal mode.
So launch mode, they're offset this way.
Normal mode.
And landing mode, they're offset the other direction because we want a down trim for one, up trim for the other. And that's all you need to do. So that'll give you the same function, just two different ways to approach it, and one you get an audible flight mode position. If you don't want, if you like the flight mode and you have flaps turned on, let me go back here. So I'm going to click on this guy, go into the function list and go into the flap system. Now this one, I'm using flight mode, so I don't want the flap trims to be set in here. So I can go down to switch D and scroll to the right, and eventually it'll say, or go all the way to the left, and it'll say inhibit. See, and then when it says inhibit, you don't have any flap setting. So this switch won't do anything.
Normal mode. Launch
But that's okay because you're doing it with the modes now. So if we go back into the monitor again,
normal mode.
you can
Launch
see
mode.
it's doing exactly what we
Landing
wanted,
mode. Normal mode. Launch mode.
but using the modes. So hopefully that was helpful.